Hello, class. Professor Mandeville back. Last lecture, we ended up talking about the great William H. Minor and his wife, Alice T. So we want to finish up a couple more things about railroads, and that's corruption. Now, obviously, we already talked about corrupt schemes like the Credit Mobilier scandal with the building of railroads and, illegal billing of Congress. But there were plenty of other things that were used by railroad companies that are going to end up leading to our first ever regulation of industry in America in 1887, which we'll get to in a minute. Railroad companies used all sorts of little tricks to make tremendous amounts of money, beside the fact that they're having a lot of the construction of their tracks subsidized by either the federal or state government in the form of cash or land grants. They would use such things as handing out free passes on their trains to key politicians to keep them happy, or to members of the news media, newspaper people hoping to get positive stories. They would give rebates or kickbacks, as they were known, to encourage employees of certain industries to use their railroads. They'd give them under-the-table cash payments in exchange for shipping freight on a particular rail, which was highly, illegal and also unethical. They'd offer special rates to certain companies to lure them in. But what's going to be their downfall is they would never, ever offer a discount, a break, a special rate, or anything to farmers. And farmers in America really were the largest industry, as we all know. And they always had to pay full price for everything. And farmers tried everything under the sun to qualify for discounted freight prices, to ship their grains to market, to buy the materials they needed, like seeds and equipment and whatnot. And the railroads always refused. The farmers formed what many people would consider, I suppose, to be unions, in the form, the major one of these organizations where farmers joined together to attempt to get discounts out of railroads, and also to buy things like seeds at discount and whatever, which they were successful doing. They created an organization known as the National Grange, sometimes just referred to as the Grange. There were Grange Halls all across America, including in the North Country. There's a Grange Hall right in the center of Keysville, on the west side of the Arch Bridge. You can, on the front of the building with the really ornate weather vane, it says Grange Hall number whatever. Everyone had a number. There's one in Waylandsburg. They're all over the North Country and all across the country itself. These Grange Halls were meeting places for farmers where they'd get together. They'd all order their seeds collectively at the same time to get a discount, order fertilizer. And they also tried to negotiate discounts with rail companies to ship their grains collectively to market, and the railroads refused. Grange halls were also social places. If your son or daughter was getting married, you'd have the wedding reception at the Grange Hall. Birth of a child be celebrated there, and so forth. All sorts of birthday parties, you name it. Anniversaries, all at the Grange Hall. Now, what's going to happen here is, after the Grange is consistently denied any sort of discount from railroad companies, because they all colluded together and said, don't ever give a farmer a discount, and they wouldn't, they decided, let's get the government to act. So they were successful in convincing the state legislature in the state of Indiana, a big agricultural state back then, to pass a law that forced the railroads to give farmers the same discount they would give a big company like Carnegie Steel or whatever. Now, this law, state law in Indiana, was challenged to the United States Supreme Court. And it came in front of the court in 1886, and it's known as the famous Wabash case, spelled W-A-B-A-S-H. Wabash is a river in Indiana. It's also the name of a railroad company. The Wabash Company sued, saying that the Indiana state law was a clear-cut violation of the United States Constitution's Supremacy Clause and also the Interstate Commerce Clause. The Constitution clearly states only the federal government can regulate interstate commerce. And it's pretty much accepted that all railroad companies are engaged in interstate commerce because the trade they're involved in flows across state borders. So it would be unconstitutional for a state to regulate interstate commerce. The court had no choice but to agree with the railroad company in the Wabash case, and they ruled that Indiana state law unconstitutional. All this did was tell the Grange, you went to the wrong government. Go to the federal government, get them to pass a law to regulate railroads so they offer the same discounts and whatnot to us that they do to industrialists. So the very next year, Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Clause. It made no longer were these secret special rates available to just a select few. If you're going to offer a volume discount, you had to offer it to everyone, including farmers. It also did away with the rebates or kickbacks. Any form of collusion, railroad companies would form pools in regions. It created the Interstate Commerce Commission to enforce all this. This is tremendously significant because it is the first time in American history that the federal government regulates any industry at all. And it's just the beginning. Finally, we're going to start to reel in these robber barons and regulate it in the name of all Americans. And we'll see, this is going to transform into antitrust laws, the great activity of President Theodore Roosevelt and other progressives in reeling in industry and getting them under control in the next century. So, that's it for railroads. We've spent enough time on them. What we want to talk about next is, different industrialists in America. And certainly, America was the centerpiece for innovation, as your textbook talks about, in America. From 1860 to 1890, really, we went through an age of invention in America. During that 30-year time period, more than 440,000 patents were applied for new inventions in America. And some of our greatest inventors were working on. Most of you are familiar with Alexander Graham Bell inventing the telephone in 1876. Certainly it was very crude in its beginning, and many of you may have done a experiment in an elementary class or Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, where you take two tin cans and connect them together with a piece of string and make a crude telephone. Well, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone in 1876 wasn't much more sophisticated than that. But obviously it slowly but surely transforms itself into the telephone systems that sweep across America and the world. And obviously Bell had no idea that it would turn into cell phones and smartphones that we all depend upon today. Another great American inventor of the time was Thomas Alva Edison. His first initial big breakthrough happened in 1879 when he invented the light bulb. Now, Edison, obviously, that invention of the light bulb was more than simply just bringing electric lights to Americans' homes. It brought electricity to Americans' homes because now we had a reason to have our homes wired. So really, the invention of the light bulb electrified America. And Edison's going to parlay that success into his famous laboratories that he operates down in the center of New Jersey, Edison Labs, which is today a national park, that if you're ever down in that neck of the woods of Edison, New Jersey, you gotta visit it. It's an amazing place. And he's going to parlay that into a whole host of inventions. Now, I can remember as a young boy studying Thomas Edison in elementary school. And the reason why, it's kind of similar to the reason why kids in the Shazy Rural Central School District study William H. Minor. I grew up in Port Huron, Michigan. Port Huron, Michigan, which is a city 60 miles north of Detroit, bills itself as Thomas Edison's boyhood home. Because Edison's family, his mom and dad, lived in Port Huron when Thomas was approximately age 6 to 12. So, I mean, cities are always grasping for something that's their claim to fame. My hometown, that's their claim to fame. The real claim to fame is they're at the mouth of Lake Huron on a beautiful waterway, but I guess they have to have something more than that. So, when we're in grade school, we're given these handouts with this long, multi-page list of all these inventions that supposedly Thomas Edison invented. Well, what they didn't tell us was Thomas Edison didn't invent all those things. Yeah, he invented some things himself, but he took his money that he parlayed from light bulb inventions, built these laboratories in New Jersey, and then went out and hired numerous talented inventors to work for him, come to work every day, and their job was invent something. So they're going to invent such things as the phonograph and the motion picture and the mimeograph and the dictaphone, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, granted, when you visit Edison's laboratories, Edison was a hands-on guy. He'd travel from lab building to lab building, become engaged in whatever they were working on different days, but by no means did he single-handedly invent all those items like I was misled in grade school. So, Edison is really going to parlay the light bulb into a tremendously successful laboratory corporation that'll make him even more successful and wealthy. Now, Thomas Edison, I want to share a funny little story with you about Thomas Edison in my hometown of Port Huron. Today, there's a Thomas Edison museum there. They transformed an old railroad station that used to be in service in Port Huron into the Thomas Edison Depot Museum. Now, Thomas Edison, when he was a little boy, at a very young age, I believe he was in the second grade, he was about age 7, he was expelled from the same school district that I attended, Port Huron area schools. He came home one day with a note from his parents that young Thomas had worn out all his chances. He's permanently expelled from school. Don't bother sending him back. Which back in this day and age, schools could do. If you acted up too many times and wore out your chances, they just say, you're out of here. Don't come back, unlike today. So obviously, Thomas's mom and dad were pretty mad at him. And it turns out, when you read more about Edison, he was a goof-off. And it was probably because he was bored. He was a brilliant young man and adult. And what they were doing probably in a second grade classroom back then was way too elementary for Thomas, so he's goofing off and hitting people in the back of the head with a spitball or whatever the hell he was doing. So now he can't go back to school. So Edison's father says, since you can't go to school, you're going to work, boy. So what Thomas Edison did from about age 8 to age 11 is every morning he'd get on a train that went from Port Huron, 60 miles south to Detroit. On that train, he would sell the people that were on board that train commuting to Detroit way back in this day and age for their employment. He'd sell them the morning newspaper. He'd sell them pieces of fruit and other snack items on the train trip down. Then during the day, he'd walk the streets of Detroit peddling newspapers and more fruit. Back in this day and age, most newspapers had 3 editions daily. They would have a morning edition, an afternoon, and an evening edition. So Edison's walking around the streets of Detroit all day, peddling papers and fruit. Then at the end of the day, he'd get back on the train with all the same people, peddle them snacks in the evening edition of the newspaper, then he'd go home. So Edison's basically working a 12-hour day. And he's age 8. So obviously, one thing he developed in Port Huron, my hometown, is his tremendous work ethic. Now, then when Edison's about 11 or 12, I forget, his family moves. So once they move, and I believe they moved to New Jersey, he can now go back to school, which he does. This time he's not going to goof off. He doesn't want to peddle newspapers. And he'll end up having a successful educational career. Now, the funny story I want to share with you is one of my old buddies from high school went on to get his degree in history, and he's the curator at the Edison Museum. So when I go back to my hometown occasionally, I always stop in there to visit with him and, shoot the history bowl and find out what's new at the museum and whatnot. And on a recent visit, I went in and he says to me, Tom, you're not going to believe what I've uncovered that somebody donated to the museum. And he takes me into the back room and gets into the files, and we both get the white gloves on. It's a letter that Thomas Edison had written and accompanying letters to it. Back in I believe it was the late 1930s, it might have been the early 1940s, there's going to be a movie produced known as Young Tom Edison. And, the movie's a big deal. The starring person in it who played young Tom Edison was an actor that most of you have probably never heard of, but was a household name, especially my, parents, Mickey Rooney. And when the movie's going to debut, they were going to have a premiere right at the movie theater in Port Huron. And it was a big deal. And this is going to lead to Port Huron becoming known as the boyhood home of Thomas Edison. So, Port Huron's going to put on this big extravaganza where they're going to have parades and celebrations all leading up to the premiere of the movie. So they hope to have Thomas Edison, who's still alive at this point, be the guest of honor, marshal of the parade, and so forth. Mickey Rooney, the actor's going to be there. Other actors are going to be there. So it's a big deal for my little hometown of, it's roughly 35,000 people. So they sent a letter to Thomas Edison inviting him to be the guest of honor. Someone donated the letter that was the reply, and then later my buddy researched the records at City Hall and found the accompanying letters. In the letter, Thomas Edison writes back to the city of Port Huron, who had invited him in a previous letter to be the guest of honor at this premiere parade deal. And he said, I unfortunately will not be able to attend your celebration. And he goes on in the letter to say, in fact, Port Huron is the last place I would ever visit. As far as I'm concerned, now these are his words, Port Huron is the armpit of the nation. Now, obviously, that's not what the folks in the city of Port Huron and the organizers of this wanted to hear. But let's think about it for a second. If you were a young boy, 8 to 11, and you had to ride a train every day and peddle newspapers on the streets of Detroit because you were booted out of the city school district, would you have fond memories of that city? I highly doubt it. That's all Edison could think of. So he's being honest. I'm not going back there. There's nothing great about it. Now, the reason I tell you this is not because Edison thinks Port Huron's the armpit of the world or whatever. That's what's in museums, in the back room. What they display in a museum is stuff that they want you to see to tell the story they're trying to sell to you. In the back room in their archives are letters such as this. That's where the real great material is. So if you ever become a historian and you start deeply into historic research on a person like Edison, you're going to go to these little Edison museums. You're going to go into the archives and sift through the documents. And the beauty of it is, major museums and universities today have these documents scanned, and they're available right in your home through your computer. You don't have to travel to the ends of the earth to find these documents, to lay your hands on them and read them yourself. You can read a scanned version, which is better for the documents because the more times they're handled, the greater the chance they're going to fall apart. Plus, it's great for us as historians. We can sit in our house and do our research today, just like all of you will do for your papers. That stuff's all available online today. So that's why I took the time to tell you that. But it is kind of a comical story, but it shows you what's really there behind the scenes, the real poop, so to speak. So that's it for this one. I'm going to pick up here in a few minutes with Andrew Carnegie and J.D. Rockefeller. See you in a few.